"Your sister deserves nice things," my mother Rita said, her voice dripping with that familiar dismissive tone that had haunted my entire life. I stood there in the driveway of our family home in Portland, Oregon, watching my 23-year-old sister Jessica bounce excitedly around a gleaming silver Mercedes sedan like a child on Christmas morning. The August sun reflected off the pristine paint job, creating an almost blinding glare that matched the burning sensation growing in my chest. "My name is Amanda. I'm 25 years old, and I work as a senior operations manager for Thornlin Audio, a mid-sized electronics company downtown. I've been financially supporting my parents, Harold and Rita, for the past 2 years, quietly paying their mortgage, car payments, and household expenses while they lived comfortably on their modest retirement income. What they didn't know was that every family gathering like today's barbecue felt more like a performance where I played the role of the forgotten daughter, while Jessica basked in the spotlight of their unwavering favoritism. "Amanda, here's a little something for you too," my father Harold said, extending a small envelope toward me with the same enthusiasm one might show when handing over unpaid bills. Inside was a $50 Costco gift card. $50. I stared at the plastic card, then back at the $80,000 luxury vehicle that Jessica was already claiming as her own, posting photos on her social media with captions about how blessed she was to have such generous parents. "This is so incredible," Jessica squealed, running her manicured fingers along the leather interior. "I can't wait to drive this to work tomorrow. Everyone at the boutique is going to be so jealous." My mother beamed with pride, the same expression she'd worn throughout Jessica's childhood whenever my sister accomplished the bare minimum. "She works so hard at that retail job. She deserves something special." I bit back the urge to point out that Jessica's part-time position at an upscale clothing store barely covered her apartment rent, let alone car insurance on a Mercedes. Instead, I forced a smile and tucked the gift card into my purse. "Thanks. This is very thoughtful." The afternoon dragged on with the usual family dynamics playing out like a well-rehearsed script. Jessica dominated every conversation, talking about her plans for the car, her latest dating adventures, and her dreams of becoming a social media influencer. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, occasionally nodding when directly addressed, all while calculating in my head how my latest payment toward my parents' financial stability had indirectly funded this lavish gift for my sister. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very car Jessica was celebrating had my name on the financing paperwork. Growing up, I had learned early that love in the Peterson household was distributed unevenly. Jessica, with her blonde hair and bubbly personality, had always been the golden child who could do no wrong. When she struggled in school, she received tutoring and encouragement. When I excelled academically, earning a full scholarship to Portland State University, the achievement was barely acknowledged at the dinner table. The pattern continued into adulthood, where Jessica's minimum wage retail job was celebrated as finding her passion, while my steady climb up the corporate ladder was dismissed as just what Amanda does. 2 years ago, when my parents began struggling with their mortgage payments after my father's early retirement due to health issues, I had stepped in without hesitation. Harold had suffered a mild heart attack at 62, forcing him to leave his position as a manufacturing supervisor. Rita had never worked outside their home, dedicating her life to raising us and managing household affairs. When they confided their financial fears to me during a family dinner, I immediately offered to help. "Don't worry about the house," I had told them that evening. "I'll take care of the mortgage until you figure things out." What started as temporary assistance gradually became permanent support. Within months, I was covering not just their mortgage, but their car payments, utility bills, and maintenance expenses. When they needed a new vehicle last year, I had used my excellent credit score to secure financing for what I assumed would be a practical family car. The Mercedes had been Harold's choice, something reliable and comfortable for their golden years. I had agreed to the upgrade, thinking my parents deserved a nice vehicle after decades of driving used cars. The paperwork process had been handled entirely through me, with Harold and Rita treating the financial arrangements as merely bureaucratic details they didn't need to understand. I had explained that using my credit would secure better interest rates and terms, which they appreciated for the money it would save. What I hadn't anticipated was that they would eventually view the car as entirely separate from my financial contribution, as if the monthly payments I made were invisible acts of generosity rather than the reason they could afford such luxury. Jessica had always been oblivious to my support of our parents' lifestyle. She visited regularly, enjoyed the comfortable home environment, and never questioned how two people on a fixed retirement income could maintain such a standard of living. Her self-centered worldview didn't extend to wondering about financial logistics or considering the sacrifices others might be making on her behalf. As I watched her continue to pose with the Mercedes while our parents beamed with pride, I felt a familiar mixture of frustration and resignation. This wasn't just about the car or the gift card. This was about 25 years of being taken for granted, of having my contributions minimized while Jessica received credit for achievements she'd never earned. But as I stood there in the driveway, something shifted inside me. For the first time, instead of swallowing my disappointment, I began to consider what would happen if I simply stopped enabling this dynamic. The breaking point came when Jessica started making plans for her car that revealed just how completely my family had written me out of the narrative. As we moved from the driveway to the backyard patio, she was already on her phone, scheduling appointments for custom seat covers, researching premium sound system upgrades, and texting friends about weekend road trip ideas. The casual entitlement in her voice as she discussed these expensive modifications made my stomach turn. "I'm thinking of getting the interior detailed next week," Jessica announced, scrolling through luxury car service websites. "Maybe some custom floor mats with my initials. This car deserves the best care." Rita nodded approvingly. "You should definitely keep it in perfect condition. It's such a beautiful gift." I watched this exchange with growing disbelief. Not once in the past hour had either of them acknowledged how the car had actually come to be in their driveway. The financing, the down payment, the monthly obligations that would continue for the next 5 years. None of it seemed to exist in their version of reality. In their minds, Harold and Rita had simply decided to buy Jessica a Mercedes, and it had magically appeared. "Actually," I said quietly, setting down my glass of iced tea, "I should probably get going." "Already?" Harold looked surprised. "We haven't even cut the cake yet." I glanced toward the kitchen where a congratulatory cake sat waiting, decorated with frosting roses and the message, "Congratulations, Jessica," in flowing script. Another celebration centered entirely around my sister, funded by my financial contributions, with no acknowledgement of my role in making any of it possible. "I have some errands to run," I replied, pulling my car keys from my purse. Then, making what felt like the most natural decision in the world, I walked over to Jessica and held out my hand. "Can I borrow the Mercedes keys? I need to move it so I can get my car out." Jessica handed them over without hesitation, too absorbed in her phone to question the request. Harold was busy preparing the grill for a second round of burgers, while Rita had gone inside to check on the cake. None of them were paying attention as I walked calmly to the Mercedes, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. As I drove away from the house in what Jessica believed was her car, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. For 2 years, I had been subsidizing a lifestyle that my family took completely for granted. They had grown so comfortable with my financial support that they had stopped seeing me as a person with feelings, needs, or boundaries. The Mercedes wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of how thoroughly they had convinced themselves that my contributions were invisible and my feelings were irrelevant. I knew this moment would change everything, but as I merged into traffic and headed toward my own apartment, I realized I was ready for that change. By the time I reached my apartment complex 20 minutes later, my phone was already buzzing with confused text messages from Jessica. The first one simply read, "Where did you go with my car?" followed quickly by, "Dad wants to know when you're bringing it back." I set the phone aside and took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away 2 years of accumulated resentment while my family presumably stood around my parents' driveway, waiting for me to return with what they considered to be Jessica's birthday present. I had moved into my 1-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District 18 months earlier, choosing a modern building with underground parking specifically because I valued privacy and security. The monthly rent was substantial, But my salary at Thornlin Audio had grown steadily with each promotion, and I had always been careful with money. What my family didn't know was that after covering their expenses, I still managed to save a significant portion of my income, building financial independence they had never bothered to ask about. My phone rang as I was making dinner, Harold's name flashing on the screen with an urgency that made me almost laugh. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, then another. Finally, after the 5th missed call, I listened to the messages while stirring pasta on my stove. "Amanda, this isn't funny anymore." Harold's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Jessica is very upset. You need to bring her car back right now. I don't know what kind of point you're trying to make, but this has gone too far." The second message was more threatening. "If you don't return that vehicle immediately, I'm going to have to call the police and report it stolen." "I'm serious, Amanda. This is completely unacceptable behavior." But it was the third message that made me laugh out loud. Harold's voice had shifted from angry to confused, with Rita's voice audible in the background. "We're looking at some paperwork, and there seems to be some kind of mistake. Call me back as soon as you get this. We need to straighten this out." I finished my dinner in peaceful quiet, watching the Portland skyline through my apartment window, while my phone continued to buzz with increasingly frantic messages from both parents and Jessica. The transformation from angry demands to bewildered questions told me they had finally discovered what I had known all along, that the Mercedes registered in my name, financed through my credit, with monthly payments automatically deducted from my bank account, was legally and financially mine. Around 8 p.m., I finally called Harold back. He answered on the first ring. "Amanda, thank God. Where are you? We need to talk about this car situation." "I'm at home," I said calmly. "And there's nothing to talk about. The Mercedes is parked in my garage." "You can't just take Jessica's car." Harold's voice cracked with desperation. "We gave it to her. It was her gift." "With what money, Dad?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea. "Your retirement pension? Mom's non-existent income? Or maybe Jessica paid for it herself with her part-time retail salary?" Silence stretched across the phone line. I could hear Rita talking urgently in the background, though her words were muffled. "You know we've been struggling financially," Harold finally said. "We couldn't have afforded something like this without your help. But that doesn't mean—" "It means exactly what it means," I interrupted. "I bought that car. My name is on the title, the registration, and the loan documents. My credit score secured the financing. My bank account makes the monthly payments. The car is mine." "But we intended it as a gift for Jessica." Rita's voice came on the line, apparently having grabbed the phone. "You were just helping us with the paperwork." "Really? And what about the down payment, the insurance payments, the registration fees?" I waited for an answer that didn't come. "For 2 years, I've been supporting this family, while you've acted like my contributions were invisible. Well, now you can see exactly what those contributions look like." The next morning brought a parade of phone calls that I let go to voicemail while getting ready for work. Jessica had apparently spent the night crying. Harold was threatening legal action he couldn't afford, and Rita was trying to negotiate some kind of compromise. But what struck me most was that not one of their messages included an acknowledgement of my years of financial support or an apology for taking me for granted. At Thornlin Audio, my colleagues noticed my unusually good mood during our morning team meeting. Patricia, our marketing director, commented that I seemed especially energized as I presented quarterly operational improvements. If only she knew that my energy came from finally standing up to a family that had spent decades treating me like a walking ATM with no feelings or boundaries. During my lunch break, I called my bank to verify all the details I already knew by heart. The Mercedes loan was indeed in my name, with 3 years and 2 months remaining on the payments. The car was titled to me, registered to my address, and insured through my policy. There was no legal ambiguity whatsoever. The vehicle belonged entirely to me, regardless of my family's assumptions or intentions. My phone rang while I was reviewing these details with the bank representative. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and for once, I decided to answer. Amanda, please. Jessica's voice was thick with tears. I don't understand what's happening. Mom and Dad said you took my car. When are you bringing it back? It's not your car, Jessica, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. It never was your car. But they gave it to me for my birthday. Everyone saw them give me the keys. They gave you keys to a car they don't own and couldn't afford, I explained. I've been paying for that car since the day we bought it. I've been paying for a lot of things, actually. There was a long pause. What do you mean? I mean that for the past 2 years, I've been covering Mom and Dad's mortgage, their car payments, their utilities, and most of their living expenses. The comfortable lifestyle you've been enjoying during your visits home, I made that possible. Jessica was quiet for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and confused. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, I replied, because none of you ever asked how 2 people on a fixed retirement income could suddenly afford to live like they were still earning full salaries. You just accepted the comfortable house, the nice dinners, the gifts, and the generosity without wondering where it all came from. But I thought they were just managing well, Jessica said weakly. They were managing well because I was subsidizing their entire lifestyle, and instead of acknowledging that or showing any gratitude, they used my financial support to buy expensive gifts for you while handing me a $50 gift card. I could hear Jessica crying softly on the other end of the line. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She had grown up in the same household I had, watching our parents shower her with attention and praise while barely noticing my achievements. In many ways, she was as much a victim of their favoritism as I was, just from the opposite direction. What happens now? She asked. Now you learn what it's like to live without someone else paying for everything, I said. And maybe Mom and Dad learn what it's like to be grateful for help instead of taking it for granted. That evening brought the confrontation I had been both anticipating and dreading. Harold and Rita arrived at my apartment building around 6 p.m., having somehow convinced the front desk security guard to let them up to my floor. When I heard the knock on my door, I already knew who it would be. Amanda, we need to talk, Harold said the moment I opened the door. Rita stood beside him, clutching her purse like a shield, her eyes red from crying. I stepped aside to let them in, noting how they both glanced around my apartment with surprise. It was the first time either of them had visited my home, and I could see them taking in the modern furniture, the original artwork on the walls, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. This was clearly not the modest living situation they had imagined for their struggling daughter, who was helping them make ends meet. Nice place, Rita said, unable to hide her shock. You never mentioned it was so upscale. You never asked, I replied, gesturing for them to sit on my leather sectional sofa. Would you like some coffee? Harold waved off the offer impatiently. We're not here for a social visit. We need to resolve this car situation. Jessica has been inconsolable since yesterday. I settled into the armchair across from them, the same spot where I had taken Harold's phone call the night before. There's nothing to resolve. The car belongs to me. Legally, maybe, Rita said, her voice strained. But morally, you know we intended it as a gift for Jessica. You can't just change the arrangement after the fact. I didn't change anything, I replied calmly. You created an arrangement in your minds that had nothing to do with reality. You decided to give away something that belonged to me without asking me, and now you're upset that I won't go along with your fantasy. Harold leaned forward, his face flushed with frustration. Don't act like you bought that car for yourself. You helped us get financing so we could give Jessica something special. You knew what the plan was. The plan was for me to use my credit to secure a car loan because you couldn't qualify on your own. I corrected. Everything else was your assumption. Just like you assumed I'd keep paying your mortgage forever, and cover your bills forever, and subsidize your lifestyle forever. all while being treated like a second-class family member. Rita's eyes filled with tears. We never asked you to do those things. You offered to help. I offered temporary help during a crisis, I said. What I got instead was permanent financial responsibility with zero appreciation. Do you have any idea how much money I've given you over the past 2 years? They exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I realized they had never bothered to calculate the total. Between the mortgage payments, car payments, insurance, utilities, maintenance, and emergency expenses, I've paid out over $60,000 to keep you living comfortably, I continued. And yesterday, when you decided to throw a party to celebrate your generosity toward Jessica, you handed me a $50 gift card and told me my sister deserves nice things. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them both processing this information, perhaps for the first time truly understanding the scope of my financial contribution to their lives. Finally, Harold spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We didn't realize how much you were doing. You didn't want to realize, I said, because then you would have had to acknowledge it, appreciate it, and maybe even treat me with the same consideration you show Jessica. The final blow came when I showed them the folder I had prepared. 2 years' worth of bank statements, loan documents, and payment receipts that painted an undeniable picture of my financial support. As Harold and Rita flipped through page after page of evidence, I watched their faces change from defiance to shock to something approaching horror. This can't be right, Rita whispered, staring at a bank statement showing a mortgage payment of $2,800. We never asked for this much. You never asked for any specific amount, I replied. You just complained about money troubles and let me handle everything. The mortgage payment is what it is. The utilities cost what they cost. The car payment is what we agreed to when you picked out a luxury vehicle. Harold was studying the Mercedes loan documentation, his hands shaking slightly as he read through the terms. 60 months at $480 per month, plus insurance, plus maintenance. Amanda, this is a lot of money. Yes, it is, I said simply. It's money I've been paying for over a year so you could have a nice car. And yesterday you gave that car to Jessica as if it cost you nothing. Rita looked up from the bank statements, tears streaming down her face. We thought you were just helping us get back on our feet. We didn't realize you were carrying the whole load. Because you didn't want to realize it, I said, my voice growing stronger. It was easier to accept my help without acknowledging what it meant. That way, you could still feel like you were the generous parents giving gifts to your deserving daughter, instead of facing the reality that everything you've been giving Jessica came from me. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. For 2 years, they had lived in a fantasy where their comfortable retirement lifestyle was somehow sustainable on their fixed income, where expensive gifts for Jessica were acts of parental love rather than redistribution of my earnings. Harold's phone rang, breaking the heavy silence. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and he answered with a shaking voice. Hi, sweetheart. No, we're still talking to Amanda. I know you need the car for work tomorrow. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Jessica, honey, this is more complicated than we thought. No, Amanda isn't being unreasonable. Yes, the car is legally hers. I watched him struggle to explain to his golden child that her birthday present had never actually belonged to them to give. Rita sat beside him, clutching the bank statements, her face pale as she continued to absorb the financial reality of their situation. Jessica wants to know if she can make payments to you for the car, Harold said after hanging up. Maybe work out some kind of arrangement. I almost laughed. With what money? She makes minimum wage at a clothing store. The monthly payment on that Mercedes is more than her entire paycheck. The absurdity of the situation finally seemed to hit Rita. Oh my God, Harold. What have we done? We've been living like millionaires on Amanda's salary. The good news is that you don't have to anymore, I said, standing up and walking to my window. The Portland skyline glittered in the evening light, a view I had earned through years of hard work and careful financial planning. I'm done subsidizing your lifestyle. Harold's face went white. Amanda, you can't just cut us off. The mortgage payment is due next week. Then I suggest you figure out how to make it, I replied. You could downsize to something affordable, or maybe Jessica could contribute to the household expenses instead of spending her paychecks on designer clothes and nights out. The golden child's reign was officially over, and my parents were about to learn what their finances actually looked like without my intervention. My parents' comfortable retirement fantasy collapsed within 3 months when they could no longer make their mortgage payments without my support, forcing them to sell their house and move into a modest apartment where they learned to live within their actual retirement income for the first time. Jessica's social media presence took a devastating hit when friends and coworkers realized the luxury car she had been bragging about had been taken back by her sister, leaving her to take the bus to her retail job while facing questions about our family's financial troubles that she couldn't answer. Their relationship with extended family deteriorated rapidly when aunts, uncles, and cousins learned the truth about my years of financial support and Harold and Rita's ungrateful treatment of me, making family gatherings awkward affairs where people whispered about favoritism and poor judgment. I kept the Mercedes and used the money I had previously spent supporting my parents to travel, invest in my future, and build the independent life I had always deserved, finally free from people who had valued my money more than my heart. Looking back on my decision to drive away that day, I realized that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or elaborate schemes. It's simply refusing to allow people to take advantage of your generosity while treating you as if you don't matter, and discovering that your worth was never dependent on their approval.